Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, bringing back Pennsylvania, but first, the Supreme Court rejects GOP challenges. As they say, let's get to it.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Welcome back. Well, we have a number of important topics to analyze and to discuss, and joining me to do that is Charlie Thompson. He's a reporter with the Harrisburg Patriot News and Penn Live and a frequent guest on the program. Charlie, how are you today?
Good, Terry. How are you?
And the weather's good as we tape this. The sun is out and the weather's good, right?
Yeah, it's sweet out there.
Yeah. All right. Let's start with, as you know, during the course of the presidential campaign and after, there were numerous lawsuits by the Trump campaign and its supporters. And now we have the latest that's basically been rejected by the Supreme Court.
Yes.
So what's that all about?
Well, as of this week, the Supreme Court has decided not to take up any of the major Republican-led lawsuits over our 2020 presidential vote. Two of them were cases that were filed over the 3-day extension of the receipt of mail-in ballots because of the Postal Service.
As long as the
delays.
ballot was submitted to the proper place, I'll say, authority in each county, they could be counted 3 days, up to 3 days after the actual election day.
Right,
correct?
if they were received by that Friday.
Right.
And that was the result of an earlier suit where the state Supreme Court had ruled that 3-day extension would be valid. And the Republicans had challenged that because they said that it violated the notion that Election Day is a day.
A day, yeah.
And anyway, the court, the U.S. Supreme Court decided not to hear that. There was a notable dissent from Justice Clarence Thomas, who said that, look, it's asking too much of us to decide these election cases in the compressed time where the campaign is in full throttle and we have an election day staring down the barrel of a gun at us. So he said there's no better time to take up these election issues and decide, who has the final word, things like, does the legislature have the final word? Does the court have the final word? And clarify some of these things for the future than in between campaign seasons. Yeah. The other suit was Michael Kelly, a U.S. Rep, Mike Kelly from Butler County, who had said that our expansion of mail-in voting was done unconstitutionally, and that we would really need to amend the Constitution to allow for that wider use of no-excuse mail-in ballot. The court
but this should
end,
put it bluntly, this should end the court cases now. The election's over.
Right, and it means that essentially that there are still questions about election administration in Pennsylvania after this first year with the broad no-excuse mail-in balloting, and that is now going to be left to the legislature and Governor Wolf to resolve.
All right, I want to go to another important topic, and that's Senator Toomey. He was one of 7 Republicans who voted basically to convict President Trump of the article of impeachment. And there's been a backlash in this state almost unparalleled for a statewide official.
Yeah. I wrote about this a week or two ago, and I referred to it as the Leslie Gore moment for the Republican Party. And the reference there is, it's my party and I'll cry if I want to. It's their party, and they're crying because Pat Toomey voted to convict former President Trump on the article of impeachment for incitement to riot. And about 6, 7, maybe 8, I mean, the number changes day by day, but there are a handful of county party committees that have voted to censure Toomey.
Censure him.
Which is basically a sternly worded letter that's put in your personnel file, right? Because he's not running for re-election.
I've referred to it as a reprimand. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But now, the language of some of these resolutions says we would like you to return money from donors in our county and that sort of thing.
Sure.
But there's no real teeth to it.
Right.
And however, it's a symbolic gesture that makes some of those who are from very pro-Trump regions of the state feel better about that repudiation of Trump by Senator Toomey. And this has gotten to the level of where earlier this week, the state Republican committee took it up as to whether or not they should do a censure resolution.
Hold on to your
statewide.
answer to that. We're going to run to a break, but this is an important. What happened with the state committee last week, and as the show airs, we still don't have a complete resolution to it. But I want you to weigh in after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, I'm talking with reporter Charlie Thompson, and we're into the subject of Pat Toomey, who has been censured by 6-7 counties. As Charlie said a moment before the break, that number certainly changes. And there was a little mix-up when the state Republican committee met this past week to do the censure. I don't think we've had a censure of a statewide politician in Pennsylvania in modern history. When I reviewed it, I didn't see any. Yeah. Well, Charlie, so where does it stand now? It could change by the time this airs. You know, this airs over the state over a 4-day period.
Yeah. Well, let's just put it this way. I think on Wednesday night, the state Republican committee members had a 4 or 5 hour airing of the grievances over this. Pat Toomey spoke to them apparently by Zoom. A couple of the congressmen weighed in, and then members, you know, I'm sure, issued their strong opinions from, hey, we've got to censure him, to really, there's no real benefit that we see to our party to doing this. It's better for us to look forward now and work on the 21 elections, the 22 elections. I've talked to some members of the committee who have said that, you know, they really can't afford to lose anybody, and they're worried that there are people who would be kind of turned off by a statewide rebuke of Senator Toomey for this vote, right? And they could actually leave the party.
Doesn't this show the division within the Republican Party between what I'll call the establishment Republicans, maybe a bad way to put it, and the Trump supporters? It
really does, and I mean, I just think it's a barometer of the fact that you know, that party has to kind of settle on what is its identity going forward. I mean, not just Pennsylvania, but nationally.
Yeah. Okay, we're down to about 2 minutes in this segment. When we vote on May 18th, there's going to be amendments that every registered voter in the state is going to have a chance to vote yay or nay or not vote for that particular measure. What are they?
Yeah, 3 are queued up. One is a fairly non-controversial amendment on inserting some racial protections, anti-discrimination protections in the Constitution. But the 2 that will get much more talk, I think, are and are probably going to be very interesting to see how the public comes down on this, are the kind of the residue of our coronavirus pandemic and Governor Wolf's emergency declarations. If you'll remember, last year, around about June, the legislature tried to cut off the emergency declaration. They said that, look, we've done what we needed to do to prevent the hospitals from being overrun.
And that's
now
largely
we can reopen.
Because some Republicans thought what he did was closing the state's economy. Is that
and they said now we can reopen.
Okay.
We're by the worst of this. And what happened was the Wolf administration took that to court, and the Supreme Court said, legislature, you don't have the power to end a governor's emergency declaration. So that has spawned these amendments. The first would limit a governor's power to declare an emergency to a 21-day time period.
Yeah.
And the other one would, if it's approved, would give the legislature the power to essentially stop a governor's emergency declaration by a vote in the House and the Senate without having the governor have to sign it like a bill.
We're going to have to see what kind of relevance this has. I mean, I know it's very important, but whether the average voter can get into that, it seems a bit technical.
Yeah,
to
but
me.
I think it could be, I don't know, part of me thinks that it could be sort of a proxy referendum on how did you feel that Tom Wolf handled the pandemic? Do you feel that he was
could make it that,
too dictatorial, or did he do what he had to do?
Sure. Hey, thanks for coming in.
Sure.
Good update. All right, we'll be back, and guess what? Bringing Pennsylvania back. Our guest will explain that.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by
Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, let's chat a little bit about bringing the economy of Pennsylvania back. We couldn't have a better guy to do that than Gene Barr. He's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry and covers all things relevant to the economy. Do I got that about? That's your job, isn't it?
Kind of. But isn't that all of our jobs, to get the economy going?
Yeah. So give us an update. How does the Pennsylvania economy stand right now?
Well, look, like everybody else, we've been hit. And because of the closures that we did, we've been battered in many cases, worse than many other states. So we have a long challenge to come back. But the reality was we had a long challenge even before pandemic because our state GDP growth and many other things, our population is stagnated. We have a lot of work to do in terms of getting this economy back, not just to where it was in February 2020. In our view, we have to take it further than that and really begin to make improvements here.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a big complex state, you know,
do.
and as I often divide our state into three parts, you know, so we could have three different states. I don't want to do that.
Might be five, I don't know, somewhere around there.
Whatever the number is. So relatively speaking, the economy is growing, it looks like, but not as fast as obviously many would like.
Yeah, traditionally and historically, which is why we started to look at something called Bringing Pennsylvania Back. We've been working with our colleagues in statewide associations, dozens of local chambers, to begin to figure out what it will take to grow this economy and how we can get more people participating in it,
right,
especially providing equality of opportunity. Because if you look at it, and look, we've seen an incredibly divisive time in our nation's history. But when you look at the economy, I don't care whether you're right of center, left of center, liberal, conservative, you basically want the same thing. You want a career. You want a career for your kids to where they can live nearby. You want good education. You want safe neighborhoods and communities. So how do we get people together talking about those things that make sense, that get us there? What do we need to do to make Pennsylvania more competitive, to attract the investment that will create better careers and jobs? And again, reinforce that with equality of opportunity so that as we move forward, we bring people along with us. We reduce barriers to employment, which goes into the workforce side. We think, and we're going to put significant resources into this to make this work. Pennsylvania can't afford to wait anymore.
Okay. I want to talk about a subject that's controversial, and that has to do with increasing the minimum wage. President Biden's pushing the $7.25 an hour. He wants to get to 15 in this state. Governor Wolf wants to take the state $7.05 and move it ultimately to 15, but to 12 immediately, and then modify it over the years by increasing it 50 cents a year. Now here, and last week we had a Democratic state rep on the program giving the positive side, and as you know, we want all sorts of views on here.
Sure.
We're not one-sided on this program. So you're not in favor of it, I take it.
15 is too much, let's be honest. There are people who will get a raise out of this. And advocates I've often heard, because we've been working this issue for many years, first off, I want people to make as much money as they possibly can. It really is difficult to just simply say, hey, you're going to pay them more and not expect adverse impacts. In fact, we saw it this week. 2 Kroger stores in Long Beach, California. Long Beach announced they're going to $15 an hour. They said, we're closing. The stores are marginally profitable. This makes them unprofitable. We're closing them. Similar situation, 2 stores in Washington with local ordinances. Again, the Congressional Budget Office, Congress is of course Democrat, announced that $15 an hour could cost the loss of as many as 1.4 million jobs. Yes, people will get a raise. Some people will get out of poverty. But the problem is, minimum wage only helps people that have a job. It doesn't help people get a job.
Get a job.
So what we really should be doing is drilling down and figuring out who really needs the help. So, because in many cases, the high school student, and they're not all high school students, I'm not saying that, but the high school student whose mom is a doctor, dad is a lawyer, working at a small business, and the average small business in the United States makes between $50,000 and $55,000, and minimum wage in most cases is a small business issue, should that person get a raise when they're in a household that might have $150,000
So let me ask you this
$200,000?
question before we run to a break.
Yeah.
Are you saying that you would favor a minimum wage that maybe is $8, $9, $10, but not 12 and not going to 15? Is that what's your position?
I'm saying I would favor, and we have said this, we would favor a discussion about what that is if we can find ways of offsetting those labor costs that hit business. Keep in mind, we're coming out of the pandemic. I would argue the worst economic circumstance we've seen for business in probably 100 years, certainly since the Depression. We have to be extremely cautious about layering on these additional costs as businesses are literally struggling to survive.
Right. All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, personal income tax hike proposal. It's I'll put it this way, controversial. We'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
All right, Gene Barr is my guest. He's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. All right, as you know, the personal income tax hike, there's been a hike proposed by the governor, 3.07. Now he wants to go, if I got this right, to 4.49?
Yeah, it's roughly a 50% increase.
Yeah, increase. And I take it you're not crazy about that.
Well, look, everybody talks about, it's kind of like the weather. Everybody talks about taxes. Nobody does anything about it except when they try and raise them. So here's a situation where the governor said, hey, I pay the same rate as you, and I think people heard you pay the same as me, which is not true. Everybody wants a tax rate and a tax system that's fair, that's easy to understand, doesn't have a lot of exemptions. That's Pennsylvania's tax rate. You pay 3.07, very few exemptions. This is what you pay. Of course, retirement income is exempted.
It's a flat tax, not progressive, right?
It's a flat tax. The federal has a progressive, but lots of exemptions, which of course drive that. Pennsylvania doesn't. So the governor's proposed exempting more people. We're not exactly sure how he gets around this kind of uniformity because there appears to be some blended rates here. But again, if you look at this in combination with the minimum wage proposal. So businesses struggling to survive, looking at a $15 an hour minimum wage, 50% increase in their personal income tax rate, which is a business rate because pass-through entities, that is small businesses, including S-corps, pay the personal income tax rate, not the corporate rate. Right. This is a big hit to them. And I know the argument is, well, but we're going to give a tax break to those small businesses below a certain level. Yeah, but that gets offset by a call for a $15 an hour minimum wage. There's no good news here for business. And so this tax rate, from our perspective, is it is really problematic. And I know the governor wants to use it for education, et cetera. One of the things we don't talk about is we rank 9th in the U.S. in terms of per pupil spend, which is the right way to look at this. We rank 9th in the U.S. Teacher salaries are about 11th in the U.S., and when you compare that to other states that are higher, cost of living here is much lower. So from an educational basis, we do pretty well. We ought to look at any additional spend in terms of outcomes as well. The real concern I have on education is what's going to happen with our kids as a result of this shutdown. I think we all ought to be really
yeah, we've
cautious
talked
and
about
worried
this
about
on the
that.
program with kids being at home, learning remotely, and versus in the classroom. I don't think there's any doubt that it makes a big difference whether you're in the classroom. And I can understand the concerns, and teachers ought to be vaccinated. I mean, we've got to protect people, and that's another aspect of this is the slowness with the federal government, especially getting the distribution worked out. Who should get the vaccine and in what order, and it's gotten very complicated.
It really has, and adding the 65 and up, as we were talking, adds another layer, whole nother layer of complexity. But with now the Johnson & Johnson being approved, you're going to see those shipments come out. Pfizer and Moderna are ramping up. So you're going to be seeing more and more come out. What's absolutely critical now is that Pennsylvania and other states have that structure in place, so that as the vaccine becomes more available, or vaccines in this case become more available, we have the structure and can implement as those numbers begin ratcheting up, as they will through March.
And there's been a drop in our state as well as in many other states, and it looks like if we continue to take all the safety procedures that have been recommended by the Centers for Disease Control, maybe we're over the worst, with the emphasis on maybe.
Let's hope so. I mean, the media has been fixated on these variants. Interestingly, there's a guy at Johns Hopkins who has said, he's a doctor, he predicts herd immunity by the end of April, because what he sees is these numbers declining. Many more people have had the virus than know they've had the virus. Therefore, they have the immunity. Therefore, we're beginning to get this, as we call herd immunity, quicker than maybe even we anticipated.
Yeah. I'll tell you, one of the things that I find really important is a lot of small businesses, and I talk about this a lot, whether we're talking about restaurants and bars and salons and all sorts of other things, have closed, and many of them aren't going to open. They're just out of business, and what's that going to do to the economy of the state?
Tremendous concern, and you're absolutely right. Many of them aren't coming back, which, again, hate to keep saying it, but that reinforces the need not to do things that are going to adversely impact, not to increase their taxes, not to force them to pay a much higher wage than they were before, not to put these hurdles in place that will prevent many of these Main Street businesses from coming back. I'm tremendously concerned about what we see, particularly when you look at the failure rate, what we're likely to see of minority businesses that are happening and will happen. So we have to be very, very cautious about how we bring this economy back.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and hopefully some of these businesses will come back. And the structure of the economy is still in our country pretty good. We're still
it is, and I think you see that in everything else that's going on. We just have to get them people back to work, get the vaccines in. There's three important things: vaccines, vaccines, vaccines.
All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.